So welcome to the February Montana Accessibility Interest Group meeting. Gian is here with us this morning. She has been working in the accessibility industry for almost 20 years and is CEO of Accessibility Oz in Australia. Among Gian's many experiences and honors internationally, she's worked on several W3C working groups, including the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines Working Group, and spent 6 years contributing to the development of WCAG 2, which is something that many of us know and use on a daily basis. So thanks for all your work on that, Gian. Gian speaks at conferences around the world, and we recently had the opportunity to hear her virtual presentation at Accessing Higher Ground in Colorado. So we're really happy to have you with us this morning, Gian. And especially joining us from Australia at around 4 a.m. your time. So thank you so much. Before I turn it over to you, I believe if people have questions, you'd like to just have them put those in the chat, and then at the end you'll come back and discuss those questions. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Marlene.
Okay. All right, Gian, I will turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you. Aaron said, did I help come up with the WCAG theme song? That is worth looking for on YouTube. It's pretty cool. No, I didn't. I am mentioned in there under my previous surname, which was Gian Sampson Wild. So if you play it, you'll hear that I'm listed, which is good. But I know the guy that did it. So he's been in the accessibility industry for a long time. It was very entertaining, so definitely worth looking up. Thank you, Marlene, for that introduction. I don't mind getting up at 4 a.m. I'm pretty used to early mornings having to deal with the US. We actually have a US company, Accessibility Oz, as well. So there's a whole lot of work that we need to do. And I just want to say, because 4 a.m. is a little bit too early to go into the office, that I'm working from home. So if you hear my dogs in the background, I do apologise, but just the idea of going into the office at around 3 a.m. was a little bit too much for me to take. So anyway, today I'm going to talk about interactive maps. And as Marlene said, I ran this presentation at Accessing Higher Ground, and I also ran it at CSUN. If you want to get a copy of the presentation, you can access it from the Montana Accessibility Group website, but you can also go to pz.tt/CSUN16, as in the number 16, -map, and you can download a copy of the accessible PowerPoint presentation there. Unfortunately, you can also move through the slides, but unfortunately that feature isn't screen reader accessible, and I have talked to them many times about addressing that. So here we go. So I just want to introduce you to my team. This is my team in Australia, and I have a team around the same size in the US. This is in Rye, which is down on the beach, and this was at our team week. And when I started Accessibility Oz 5-6 years ago, I wanted to mimic the percentage of people with disabilities in the general population in my own organisation. So I wanted to make sure that at least 20% of our staff were people with disabilities, and that's the way that we achieve that is by actually actively hiring people with disabilities. And at the moment, 65% of my staff have some kind of disability. Disabilities such as dyslexia, moderate vision impairment, severe vision impairment, epilepsy, migraines, physical impairments, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, post-traumatic stress disorder, and Asperger's. So some of these we obviously affect people when accessing websites, and others mean that the person needs a little bit more time or has to have very flexible hours and things like that. So we're very committed to hiring and supporting people with disabilities, not just making websites accessible. The slide's a little bit slow, so I'm just going to, sure I clicked it. There we go. So the one thing that you should know is, there it goes, a little bit too quick for me. I don't know why it's so slow this morning. It's not just about vision impairments. There's a whole range of different disabilities and things out there. And, you know, vision impairments is a small group of that. So yes, make your website accessible to people who use screen readers, but there's a lot more to it than that. And you know, I do see people, especially people new to accessibility, really just focusing on the requirements for people with vision impairments, and specifically those that use screen readers. And it's an absolutely essential part of accessibility, but it's not the only part of accessibility. So our services, so we basically do everything to do with web accessibility, so audits, mobile testing, building websites, CMS testing against UAG, the user agent accessibility guidelines, designing websites, video accessibility, user testing with people with disabilities, operating system and browser testing, consultation, accessible documents. So we've got a number of clients in the US, including George Mason, Michigan State University, McDonald's, Californian Community College Tech Center. So yeah, we're pretty busy. We have 3 products. AusPlayer, which is our accessible video player, and you can get more information on that on our website. AusArt, which is our automated accessibility testing tool, and AusWiki, which is our database of accessibility errors, screenshots, code, and solutions. And today we're going to be talking about interactive maps, and you can actually access our interactive maps fact sheet, which has a lot of information that I'm talking about today, at a11yoz.com/fs-map. So that's a11yoz.com/fs-map. Sorry, I seem to have a frog in my throat. Okay, so let's talk about the impact on the end user when it comes to interactive maps. So probably the biggest is the lack of text description. So some maps, a lot of maps maybe, don't have any text description. And there's some people with disabilities that will not be able to see or interact with the map at all. They need a text description. Of course, most of the time you would think that would be a screen reader user, but it might not be. Basically, maps are very important sources of information for blind users, and this is one of our vision impaired testers who is an excellent screen reader tester. He actually did the testing for the Amazon Kindle, the screen reader testing for the Amazon Kindle and for the iTunes store. So he says maps are very important sources of information for blind users. Map designers should never assume the data they prepare won't ever be used by people with visual impairment. Parking areas, for instance, are quite often places of meetings with one's befriended driver. One must know the area to be sure that the place of meeting is not a large 3-story building where finding your friend's car and not being killed by other cars is a real possibility. So, you know, you would think, oh, no, well, we don't need to describe a parking structure because, you know, blind people don't drive. But there usually is always a reason why this stuff needs to be accessible. The next part is keyboard accessibility. So some maps cannot be operated with a keyboard, or they don't have a highly visible keyboard focus indicator. Now, a keyboard focus indicator basically indicates where you are on the page when you tab through active items. And if you don't have a visible keyboard focus indicator, then users aren't going to know where it is they are on the screen. So it's really essential that not only is the map keyboard accessible, but that it has that keyboard focus indicator and it's highly visible. So with keyboard inaccessibility, that limits the map to mouse users only. But not only that, many assistive technologies mimic the keyboard. So if the map is not keyboard accessible, then it's not going to be able to be used by those assistive technologies. Use of colour. Oh, I thought I got rid of all the OURs in colour, but I didn't. So some maps rely on colour to convey information, and we're going to see some examples of that later. Or the colour contrast is not sufficient. Now, that means that people who are colourblind are not going to be able to understand the features of the map, but also just general people with low vision who might not even identify as a person with a disability, but have a real difficulty seeing those differences in colour. We've all come across websites where you've got light grey text on a white background, and it's really difficult to read. Well, that's the kind of stuff that means colour is going to be difficult. The other thing that you need to be able to do with a map is increase text size. So often you can zoom in on a portion of the map, but the actual text that is on the map, so maybe, like pop-ups and things like that, don't increase in text size. And that's a real problem for people who have mild or moderate vision impairments and don't use an assistive technology such, but, look at a website with increased text size. So it's really important that your legends and your information and things like that also increase in text size when you zoom in on the page. So how do you create an accessible interactive map? There's basically six things that you need to do. You need to provide a long description in text, make the map screen reader accessible, make the map keyboard accessible, meet color contrast requirements, use icons, shading or patterns in addition to color to convey information, and ensure users can increase text size. So let's start with the long description. Okay, so if you've just got an image, a static image, then what I would suggest is you need to add an alt attribute, obviously, because it's an image, and then you can have a long description after that. If you have a client-side image map, then you need to make sure all areas of the map have accurate alt attributes, and then provide a text version in a table of the important locations. So that's something to really think about when you're writing a long description for the map, is the relevant or important information. So for example, if it's a map of the city of Melbourne and where the bike places are where you can chain up your bike, then what relevant information is there? Oh, sorry, I'll just explain the difference between client side and server side. Client side is where you actually code everything into the code itself, and very specific areas of the map go to specific places. Server side is where you select a place on the map, and then it goes back to the server, and the server says, okay, take the user to this location. Now, client side can be coded with accurate alt attributes, but server side can't be. So server side, you really need to have that long description. Client-side image maps sometimes don't actually need a long description, but having said all that, most of the time we're dealing with server-side image maps such as Google Maps and things like that. So for example, if you have a map of the locations of, where you can chain up your bike in, a city, then, what's the relevant information for that person? It would be the roads, the location of the where you can put your bike, so which side of the road, that kind of stuff. Maybe the nearest train stations or tram stations or things like that, those kind of things that people might be using. What isn't relevant is where the parking structures are, or the names of certain buildings, or the names of parks or things like that. So as long as you can convey the information that is required in your long description, you don't have to fully describe absolutely everything that's included in your map. So as I said, describe only those aspects of the map that are relevant, e.g. the most important point or the most common feature of the map. Describe the distance in kilometres or metres from important points. And when I talk about important points, I mean, you know, freeway exits or between, you know, intersections of common roads, public transport stations, you know, landmarks like a football stadium, things like that. If the map's going to be used for transport, you need to give directions for car, public transport and walking. So you can say things like 300 metres from such and such train station is the such and such. And if the map is time sensitive, you know, mark the times in the long description. If the map is a transport map, you can organise the map long description by train, bus or train line and describe the locations and distances travelled. So don't feel that you, when you're writing a long description, that you have to represent the map as it appears. You might find organising the information in a different way makes more sense. And if the map is topographical, and that's actually relevant, you know, mark the height at which important points occur, like Mount Kosciuszko is this height and, you know, Mount Everest is this height. Okay, so this is a long description for some Queen Victoria Market, which is in Melbourne. It's a kind of a lot of stalls and fresh food and things like that. Very popular market, very large market in Melbourne. And so you've got these, basically what is called the Queen Victoria Market Renewal, where the City of Melbourne is actually going to be improving this area. And they've got a map here that talks about the Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and I'm just going to read the long description. The above map shows the Queen Victoria Market Project Planning Framework divided into the following sections. Q1 or Q1 between Elizabeth, Ferry, Queen and Victoria Streets, 4 new buildings with 6-star environmental ratings. Q2, and that information, that 4 new buildings, is what happens. You see that when you hover over that section, comes out as text. So that information is very important to include in a text description. Q2, between Peel, Victoria and Queen Streets, encompassing sheds A to F, 6 new buildings, including an early childhood centre. Q3, between Peel, Queen and Franklin Streets, encompassing sheds J, K, L and Stringbean Alley, a new shopping mall and parking for up to 600 cars. And Q4, between Elizabeth Street, Franklin Street, Queen Street and Ferry Street, 3 new buildings, including a fitness centre and a pool. So that text description gives you a lot of information, and, you know, it really isn't necessary if you live on Ferry Street to know exactly where things are happening, because the text description tells you just as well as the map does. This here is the Melbourne radar map, which shows you the various different weather over 4 periods over the next 15 minutes. So 4:25 p.m, 4:40 p.m, 4:55 p.m, and 5:10 p.m. So it's just a map of Melbourne, and then it just has an overlay of clouds in different colours to indicate, you know, how strong the weather is. So this long description that I'm going to read out is not for that map. The map is currently showing really no weather at all, no storms or anything like that. So this is the long description for, you know, a storm front moving across. 4:25 p.m, storm strong approaching east over Williamstown, 8 kilometres in diameter, light rain over Melbourne City, 4 kilometres in diameter. 4:40 p.m, storm strong, 10 kilometres west of Melbourne, light rain over Clayton, 4 kilometres in diameter. 4:55 p.m, storm strong over Melbourne City, 8 kilometres in diameter, rain strong over Richmond. 5:10 p.m, storm extreme over inner city East Melbourne, 10 kilometres in diameter. We'll talk a little bit about how you would create a map like that for a description like that for a GIS map, but you can get the information that you need. When people look at that map, they're going to want to know the weather and how that changes over the next hour, and that's what the long description gives you. This map is a section of Canada, and it shows you basically the different, the average temperatures, and it does use colour to convey what the average temperatures are. And so the description is, this map divides the agricultural area of the prairies into 5 distinct zones in regards to average July temperatures. Temperatures in Manitoba are 19 to 20 degrees in the south and 18 to 18.9 in the north. Saskatchewan is 19 to 20 in the southeast, 18 to 18.9 in the southwest, and 17 to 17.9 in the north. Alberta ranges from 18 to 18.9 in the south, 16 to 16.9 in the centre, and 15 to 15.9 in the north. So once again, you can't see the map, but you do get the information that you need, and that is a live site for the Canadian Grain Commission. So you know, they're really good at their long descriptions. Step 2 is screen reader accessibility. So this is a map of parking locations in the city of Melbourne, and this was partially screen reader accessible when we tested it. So basically there's little icons all over the city, and if you hover over that icon, it says things like parking 1 of 2, 483 to 485 King Street West, Melbourne Vic 3003, Morgan's Bakery. So that text description is something that anyone sees when they hover over something, and it's really important that that information is provided to a screen reader, because that kind of, although you will need a long description, that information is something that a screen reader can access while using the map. So with this particular map, our testing with screen reader users, as I said, didn't mean that the map was accessible, but this is some of the comments that they had. Icons representing parking areas on the map could only be selected randomly. So it's important that if you are tabbing or moving, just getting the screen reader to read one item after another, that it does so, you know, in what is a reasonable order, so that the closest parking structures, for example, are read, you know, next to each other. And for JAWS and NVDA in IE only, the icons have the same label, graphic map marker icon / blue _ pin, or graphic number NVDA. Only after selecting the parking area could this person read its name and address. So, you know, that's actually a little bit of a bug in IE. So we had a lot of trouble fixing that, but we did in the long run. And this person said I could select the area the same way as parking structures randomly on Firefox with JAWS and NVDA without labels, for instance, names of districts. Such selections make no sense. I never learnt what area I actually selected. And then another person said I could access parking areas only on Firefox with JAWS or NVDA. No access with other browsers or with window eyes. And buttons for filtering are labeled as filter BTN on and filter BTN off. You're not sure if the filtering category is selected or not, or what it does. So, you know, labeling buttons and things like that is also really important. You know, and links for sharing options on Facebook, etc. So you might want to, you know, a person with a disability might want to share it on Facebook to say this is where I'm going to be. They're not labelled, so when you open parking locations and go to share, there are 4 unlabelled links, and one of them is Facebook, but of course you don't know which one it is. So what do you need to do? Now this is the first requirement. I'm going to get the most complex one out of the way first, is add the map at the current place in the DOM. So what that means is that this is a code thing. So if you're not a coder, don't worry too much and just, you know, tell your developers this and they'll know what you're talking about. But basically, if your map is under a particular heading on your page, then when you go to actually activate that map, all that information needs to be in that same place. Now, it always looks like it's in the same place, but it isn't actually in the same place in the code. And so what that means sometimes, and what that means is that, you know, the map might look like it's in a particular place, but when the screen reader user goes to play with it, it's somewhere prior to where their screen reader is actually reading. So that's a really important requirement. The other thing is add skip links. So you can add hidden skip links, so screen reader users can actually skip the map, so they don't have to go through each item. So, you know, skip the following map, you know, as a hidden skip link. Where possible, use links for active regions of an interactive map. So I mean, don't use spans, don't use buttons, use links. And if you have to use something else, it has to have a text alternative. So some people might use what we call a glyphicons, which are kind of like icons really, and you can see them visually, but don't have a, by default, they don't have a text description. So visually you can see them all over the map, but nothing will get read aloud to a screen reader. So you need to actually add that text description. And for the coders out there, anything hidden with display none will be hidden from screen readers too. So you do need to be aware of that. So let's talk about keyboard accessibility. This is not necessarily keyboard, but and sorry, Aaron has said, do you recommend adding the description using ARIA label or similar? Look, ARIA is fantastic. However, it's not, you know, completely supported by all assistive technologies. So my take on ARIA at the moment is that definitely use it, but you can't rely on it as the only way of conveying information. And that's why, you know, it's really important to use a link or something like that. Otherwise, if you have to use a span, you can actually just have text there that is hidden from visual users. So yes, do use ARIA, but you know, use something else as well. So this Coles map is, I call this the Zoom of Doom, and this is actually about touch accessibility, not keyboard accessibility. So, you know, this map takes up almost all the screen on the mobile device, and if you swipe anywhere on the map, you'll move the map around. But if you want to go back to the top of the page or something like that, then you have to somehow manage to hit this tiny area outside the map, which is, you know, maybe 2 or 3 millimeters wide. So that's really hard for someone who has, you know, limited dexterity, someone that has, you know, low vision, that kind of stuff. So these are the kind of things that you need to be aware of. So make sure all actions that can be achieved using the mouse can also be achieved by using the keyboard or via touch. So these are things like zooming in and zooming out, moving around the map, activating an icon for more information. Now, Google did some great work on maps.google.com and made it fully keyboard accessible about a year ago. And when I ran this presentation at CSUN, actually the woman that had been working on the accessible Google Maps was in the presentation, so we had a really good discussion. Unfortunately, she's left Google. Yeah, maps.google.com, definitely try and use it with a keyboard. It's really quite nice. I think it could have a bit of a higher keyboard focus indicator, but you know, it's pretty good. Now, just as I said with screen readers, where possible, use links for the active regions of an interactive map. And if you have to use something like a glyphicon or a span, then you add it to the keyboard focus order, because these things aren't naturally in the keyboard focus order, by adding tab index equals 0. Sorry, the slides are a little bit slow this morning. Okay, let's talk about color contrast. So this here is a map of 3 wards, the North Ward, the South Ward and the East Ward. And the East Ward is marked in a bright blue, the South Ward in a kind of aqua, and the North Ward in a bright green. And this is definitely something that a lot of users would have trouble using, because of the colour being so similar. So make sure that your map design complies with the 4.51 color contrast ratio. So you can use color contrast and analyzers such as the Juicy Studio Luminosity color contrast analyzer, and use that by adding hex values for different colors, or the Paciello Group's color contrast analyzer, and that's an eyedropper. So if you've got a screenshot, for example, you can use the Paciello Group's analyzer and pick different colors and see if they meet those requirements. And this is kind of a little trick. When you have a map, add a border to each region of your map, say a black border, and then your map colors only need to contrast with black. They don't need to contrast with the other map region colors. And so that means that you only have one color that you need to find a bunch of colors to contrast with. Otherwise, if you have a map and it borders 4 or 5 different other things, then you have to find a color that meets color contrast with those different 4 or 5 other things, which is basically impossible. So I'd suggest adding a border of black or white, and then making sure all your colors contrast properly with that. So talking about color, use icons, shading, or patterns in addition to color. And you can also use indicators. So this here is a map of New Zealand, and it shows you where the different internet access is. And so the green are ultra fast fibre, the orange is North Power, the blue is New Chorus, and the yellow is Enable Networks. Now this is slightly accessible and slightly not. So you actually have a whole bunch of dots, but you have lines coming out of the dots, so you know what that dot represents. So Rotorua, for example, has a line to its relevant dot. Now the problem is that all of that is dependent on color, so if you can't see the difference between blue and green, then you're not going to be able to know which internet affects you. So if you had decided to use different icons, at the moment they're all circles, but if you'd use, say, a circle for New Chorus and a triangle for North Power and a square for ultra fast fibre, then that would actually make it an accessible map. And it's not that you can't use colour as well, but you should use something in addition to colour. So, once again, as I mentioned, borders to separate one area from another, different types of shading and change of colour to indicate different areas, and label markers with an icon, and individual colours and icons for different markers. Or if you've got like a map that doesn't have icons but just sections, then patterns or shading is also another way of doing that. So this is a map that uses patterns and indicators. So it has a section that is blue, has a section that's green, and a section that's orange. And each section has a line coming out of it, and that line gives you the information about that section. So if you couldn't see the colour, you'd still know the information about that particular section. So Hoddle Grid, for example, it says 25,020 residents, which is plus 109%, this is the growth in the city of Melbourne. Plus 180,000 jobs, which is plus 49%. So it's not relying on colour, but the colour is used to just make the map easier to understand for those visual users. This is another example. This is the number of residential dwelling block and the block numbers of a particular suburb in Melbourne. And the reason why a whole lot of these examples are from the city of Melbourne is because we worked really hard to make their maps accessible. It was a one-year project, so that's why we have such great examples from there. So here you've got variations of white through to purple, showing how many residential dwellings there are in a particular block in East Melbourne. So, white is 5 to 49, and the really dark purple, well, it's really just a medium shade purple, is 250 to 540. So you really do need to rely on colour and a very slight variation in colour, to the point where when I look at it, I wouldn't necessarily be able to tell which was the light purple versus the lightest purple. So the long description here is in a table, and using tables as a long description is a great idea. And this is if you really just can't do anything else to improve the map. And of course you need to do it for your long description anyway. So the column headers are number of residential dwellings in block and the block numbers. So less than 5, block numbers 611, 619, 642, etc. 5 to 49, 601, 603, 607. And you could actually add another column there that specifies the street that the block borders, but that information actually isn't on the map. So that would actually improve the map greatly, and also then improve the long description. Okay, and then step 6 is make sure that users can increase text size. And as I said, not the text size, not of the name of the map, but legends, things like that. So this particular map, Metropolitan Melbourne, has different numbers to indicate different regions, and they don't actually resize when you increase the text on your screen. So when the users can increase the size of the map, they need to be able to increase the legend and any text, and you need to decide how you're going to do that. But the most common way to increase text size is to use Control+ on your browser. So, definitely try that. Now, if you cannot, just get it working where it will support that text size, then consider providing a large version of the map where the user has increased the normal text size by 200%. So you can have the map and then say, view, larger version. Or if you're only looking at a particular point or area of interest, add a highlight box that pulls out from that section to show just that particular point or area in large size. So this here is text size, so that's what a standard Google map looks like with 8-point text. And if you increase text size, you can see the text, you can see that the text size increases to about 12 or 14 point, and the text size on the map increases, but also the description that it's the State Library of New South Wales and the number of reviews and the directions and things like that. So let's have a look at some interactive maps. So this is the radar map, and I just want to talk about this briefly. This is a question Marlene actually had for me when I was speaking at Accessing Higher Ground. So when we were working with the Bureau of Meteorology on making this map accessible, they said, oh no, it's automatically generated, we can't create a long description. And I said, well, this map doesn't come out of thin air. Like, how do you know that there's a storm front coming across Melbourne? And he said, well, because it's in a database. And it's like, well, at some point you've taken the weather information in particular areas, you've pulled it into a database, and then you translated it to say that there's a particular strong storm front coming here or a light rain there or something like that. So why don't you just add an extra step to create a text description at that point as well? You have the longitude and latitude of where these things are, and you also know the longitude and latitude of the major towns in Victoria. So it would take a little bit of work to modify the database, but not a huge amount of work, certainly not the equivalent of having someone sitting there all day writing text descriptions. It is something that can be automated. So sometimes it's just a different way of looking at things. And they have different colors indicating light, moderate, and heavy. All those things can be indicated in text and indicated automatically. So the other question that I got from Accessing Higher Ground, which I thought was a great question, was seat maps. So this is a seat map of an aeroplane, and I must say I am very, very, very familiar with seat maps because I got an email from United saying that I had flown 23 flights with them last year, and they're only one of 5 airlines that I use regularly. So it's a lot of flights. And here you actually have 1, 2, 3, three uses or four uses of colour. You've got seats that are white, you've got seats that are yellow, you've got seats that are green, and you've got seats that are red. And firstly, when you look at this seat map, I think it's in Seat Guru, it doesn't give you any easy explanation of what the colours mean. But I would guess that the yellow means that they're in front of an exit row and therefore can't move their seat back. The green means that they're behind, they are an exit row, and therefore they can't have any luggage under their feet. And red means that, you know, it's right next to the toilet, so maybe that's not a very, you know, popular place. And Aaron says Alaska Airlines has a really nice accessible seat map, so I'm definitely going to have a look at that. And he says as you tab between each seat, it automatically announces window seat, exit row. Exactly, that's what you want to do. Now this is using colour, and then we look at this next one, and you can see here they've got a section that says a little arrow that says this is first class. Then they've got a little arrow, but it's also in blue, that says this is main cabin extra. And then they've got a little arrow off screen that says this is economy. So that's a way of doing that. And once again, you can just add some icons, or you can add a text description. So you could actually say, you could actually have a little icon on each of those seats, and then in the legend explain what that icon means. Or you could say the following seats you know, have these requirements. Row 13, you can't put your seat back, you know, etc., etc. But of course, you need to make sure that that information was immediately after the map, or immediately before the map, or referenced in the map. So alt description or something like that, alt attribute. Now this is the election map. I show this at Accessing Higher Ground, and it's just a really good example, although I'm sure that you guys are all sick of the election by now, but it's a really good example of how kind of what looks complex can be made fairly accessible in terms of text description. So you've got the states in blue that voted Democrat, or like the Electoral College map voted Democrat, and then the red, the Electoral College went to Trump. So you've got, Aaron says it makes him glad he can't see colour. Well, you're from Montana, and Montana voted Trump. It's good. I usually can't talk about these things because I'm working for government or something, but usually it's like, let's not talk about the war. Anyway, so one of the ways that you can actually describe this is you can say the important information is, you know, it's not really that valuable to know which states voted Democrat versus Republican. Certainly it's important for those people in those states, but you're usually trying to find some additional information, like what makes those states similar to each other that they voted Democrat, whereas the others, what makes the other states similar to each other that they voted Republican. That's the information that you need to put in the long description. So otherwise you just give people a list of these people voted Democrat, these people voted Republican. Why, you know, giving it in a map shows people who are looking at it that there's certain states, or there's something about the states that voted Democrat versus voted Republican. And what I would say by looking at this map is that all the states on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, NV, Nevada, and California, voted Democrat, and all the states in the top right-hand corner, ME, sorry, I'm terrible with, there's so many states you have to learn, New York, Vancouver, etc., voted Democrat. And in addition, there were 4 central states that voted Democrat: Minneapolis, Illinois, Colorado, and New Mexico. All the other states voted Republican. So that shows to me that the West Coast are very strongly Democrat, and, you know, the top right, so, you know, the New York, DC area, Philadelphia area, except Pennsylvania didn't vote Trump, didn't vote Clinton, that they're also, you know, Democrats. So those 2 sections, that's the valuable information that you get out of the map, and that's, you know, what you want to say. So if you just had a list of states and, you know, whether it was Trump or Clinton, that wouldn't actually be a valid long description, because the map shows you more than just who voted for what. It shows you the trend. So when you look at a map, look at what it is trying to say, and that is or like the conclusion that you're trying to draw, and that is what you need to say in your long description. It's not that you don't say which states voted which way, it's that you also have to say, and the conclusion of this is, because that conclusion may not be obvious from the text description, where it is obvious from the map itself. And so the other thing that happens is when you hover over a particular section, so Montana, it tells you a whole lot of information. So 3 electoral votes, 100% reporting, and it has a little table here. Candidate, electoral votes, popular percentage. So that's a little data table. So there's no reason why it can't be coded as a data table, and therefore a screen reader would be able to read that information you know, easily. And so, you know, that's the kind of information that needs to be A, read to the screen reader, but B, appear when you tab to a particular item as well. And then it says click on state for more details. So, you know, that's another reason why it needs to be keyboard accessible, because if it's not, then keyboard users aren't going to be able to access that additional information. So that's it from me. I'm very happy to answer any questions, or if you've got any example maps that you'd like me to look up, and I can talk about how you make them accessible. But definitely have a look at that fact sheet that Marlene added before, and feel free to reach out to me if you've got any questions. And I will actually be at CSUN in San Diego in about a month. So we have a booth, so if you are there, please feel free to come down and have a chat to us. But yeah, any questions? Do I know of any accessible map creation tools? So that's a really easy question, Aaron. No. No, it's really the GIS mapping systems and all that kind of stuff really just haven't got their act together. A lot of people don't even try to make maps accessible. They just kind of give up. And quite frankly, I think blame is too strong a word, but you know, I feel that Google is a little bit responsible for this, because about 5-10 years ago, they had what they called a screen reader accessible Google map. And so basically, you know, they actually worked really hard to make their maps accessible, and if you turned style sheets off, you'd actually see there was a link for screen reader users to learn how they could use you know, the map in an accessible way, and then they didn't maintain it. And so all of a sudden, all these maps that were screen reader accessible became keyboard traps and became completely, you know, impossible to use. So yeah, there really is this kind of, it's almost a block, it's almost a mental block that, oh, you can't make maps accessible, so people don't even try. And in all the testing that we've done and all the staff that I have that rely on assistive technologies, they're always saying, you know, really, you know, you just have to make this map more accessible. We want the map to be accessible. One of the questions I got from Accessing Higher Ground is, should you just hide the map? And the answer to that is definitely not, because you know, there are people that are going to want to actually access it. Okay, so I'm just looking at this National Geographic map. There are, okay, the red and blue. So this is, yeah, so once again, it's very similar. The maps in the body of content is very similar to the map that we saw about the election. But then the top map has kind of like darker blues and lighter blues and whites and light reds and dark reds. And the biggest problem I have with this map is it's not even accessible to me, because I don't know what those colors mean. I know it might be obvious to a, you know, natural born American, but what's a light red state versus a medium red state versus a dark red state? Probably that different people, you know, that a stronger number of people voted for a particular party. But definitely a visible legend is important there. And what I would say there is that there's no reason why you couldn't use some kind of pattern instead of just variations in color. So you could have like a crosshatch for dark blue, you know, you could have like straight lines for dark red, that kind of stuff. And I would definitely say that basically this would be best, the long description would be best as a table, where you would say, you know, Washington, and you wouldn't say Washington medium blue, because medium blue doesn't mean anything, but Washington and whatever that medium blue represents. So Washington, you know, high Democrat voting or something like that. And then I'd also say that I'd also talk about the trend. So the trend in this map is a little bit different to the trend in the other map. The trend in this map, you can see that the West Coast voted Clinton, and a lot more of the top north corner down to Virginia voted Clinton as well. And then you got a little bit of a center, don't know what WI stands for, but Minneapolis and Illinois that are blue, Florida and North Carolina that are blue, New Mexico and Colorado. So that's, once again, I'd say, you know, West Coast, north to the middle of the East Coast, you know, so from the top down to North Carolina were Democrats. The center was mostly Republican, you know, etc. So that's how I would describe that map. Aaron asked, do I find it easier to make maps accessible to mobile assistive technologies? I would think that the use of touch gestures instead of a keyboard could help provide the positioning information. That's a great question. Actually, the answer is no. The reason why we find it harder to make anything accessible on mobile is because we can't access the code of any mobile apps or things like that. So it's really hard to then actually test that a text description is accurate. You have to rely on, you know, what the screen reader reads out, and it could be, you know, something that the user does incorrectly, which you know, means it doesn't get read out. So it might actually be coded properly, but you know, people still can't use the maps. So yeah, making maps and things accessible on mobile is a lot harder. Certainly, I can imagine that. I mean, also, I suppose the touch is very similar to the mouse. And also, there are people that use keyboards on mobile devices and tablets. So mobile maps need to be accessible to keyboard on mobile and tablets as well. And as I said before, that's even harder because you can't look at the code.
I have a question for you too, Gian. I was just writing some guidelines for how to work with complex images in online courses when you're using a learning management system. And a lot of what you said here really pertains to that. So with instructors who aren't coders and they're just working in the LMS and they're adding the kinds of maps that you're showing, long descriptions are probably the most critical and important thing they can do, whether it's table or text. What's your advice on that we should give instructors?
Yeah, I would say that certainly the accessibility of a map in an LMS or something like that is not really up to the, you know, the person that's you know, like your content authors or your faculty and things like that. Often it's, you know, a standard GIS map that they've got to pull in or something like that. So keyboard accessibility and, you know, the types of icons that are used and whether it uses color is often things that they can't modify at all. But what they can do is provide the long description. And the long description is essential because it is for people who can't use the map for a variety of reasons. It might not just be screen reader users. It might be because the map's not keyboard accessible and things like that. So absolutely, that's what I would say to them, is make sure that you write a long description, and please have a look at that fact sheet because it's got some examples of long descriptions and what you do to go about writing a long description.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, and I really agree with you. It's you're not describing all the details, you're just picking out those critical
Those, yeah,
details.
relevant
The
information. Yeah.
relevant ones. Yeah, that was very helpful to hear again.
Aaron asks, so should the long description be provided as text that is displayed visually instead of inserted into an alt tag? Absolutely. When you're doing a long description for a map, it needs to be on the page. Now, if you really, really, really don't want it to be on the page, then you need to provide a link to that long description immediately before or immediately after the map, but you can't put all that information in an alt attribute. Firstly, alt attributes shouldn't be longer than 100 characters, but secondly, though, that long description is not just for screen reader users, and alt attributes are for screen reader users. So you really want people who, if they have any trouble with the map, can easily access that long description and get the information that they want.
And I like your idea of using a table for some information instead of a paragraph too. I thought that was a really good example you provided that would help everyone really better understand the information in the table, in the map, if it's presented in a table.
Yeah, and that way you can scan through things and find the section that's relevant to you.
Right. Any other questions for Gian? This has been really great. I really appreciate your thanks, Erin. I really appreciate your time this morning, Gian, and really looking forward to seeing you at CSUN and stopping by your booth and talking more with you about the accessibility issues that come up all the time with the faculty that we work with.
Yeah, well, we're working with Montgomery County Community College at the moment with that. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you. So yeah, definitely see you there.
Great. And Erin says, thank you so very much. Looking forward to meeting you down at CSUN in a few weeks. And Nancy Klaus, an instructional designer here at the University of Montana, says, thanks, Gian, very helpful. So yeah, thank you so much. We're pretty much at the top of the hour. If there's not any more questions, it's about 5 a.m. for you. I'm not sure if you're still having more coffee or getting some more rest, but thank you so much for your time this morning.
You're welcome, and thank you for the questions. I really enjoyed it, and I'll see you at CSUN.
All right, we'll be in touch. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye.